Little Sofia Martinez hadn't planned on visiting the courthouse that Tuesday morning. Her mother, Elena, a single mom and court translator, rushed through the metal detectors with Sofia's tiny hand in hers. The towering marble columns and echoing voices made Sofia's eyes widen with wonder. When Elena's colleague waved urgently from across the lobby, she knelt down. "Stay right here, Mija. 1 minute." Sofia nodded solemnly, clutching her stuffed dinosaur as her mother stepped away, unaware that her daughter was about to change lives forever. The Fairfield County Courthouse was particularly busy. That morning, a high-profile custody case involving a local celebrity had drawn media attention, and security was heightened throughout the building. Elena Martinez hadn't intended to bring her daughter to work, but her babysitter had called with a fever just 30 minutes before Elena was due to translate for a critical hearing. As one of only 3 certified Spanish court translators in the county, she couldn't miss the appointment. Sofia stood exactly where her mother had left her. Though her curious eyes darted everywhere, at 3 years old, she possessed an unusual stillness that often surprised adults. Her preschool teacher had once commented that Sofia observed the world like a tiny scientist, taking mental notes on everything and everyone around her. This quality had emerged shortly after her father's deployment overseas. With the military 6 months earlier, Elena noticed that her daughter had grown more watchful since their video calls with him had become their new normal. The courthouse lobby bustled with activity attorneys in sharp suits hurried past with leather briefcases. Nervous defendants whispered with their lawyers in corners, and uniformed bailiffs directed the flow of human traffic with practiced authority. Sofia absorbed it all, her dark eyes missing nothing. She clutched Rex, her well-loved stuffed dinosaur named after her father's military working dog that she had met. During their last base visit, a young clerk noticed the little girl standing alone and approached with concern. "Are you lost, sweetie?" he asked. Crouching to her level, Sofia shook her head solemnly. "I'm waiting for my mama. She's a translator," she replied with surprising clarity for a 3-year-old. "She helps people who speak Spanish like my abuelita." "That's wonderful," the clerk replied, impressed by her vocabulary and composure. "Would you like me to wait with you until she comes back?" Before Sofia could answer, a commotion near the entrance caught everyone's attention. A man in handcuffs was resisting the officers escorting him into the building. His shouts echoed throughout the marble lobby, causing several people to back away nervously. The clerk straightened immediately, his expression tense as he looked between the disturbance and the little girl. "Stay right here, okay?" he instructed Sofia, before hurrying toward his security post. But Sofia had already spotted something far more interesting than the shouting man. Through the shifting crowd of adults, she glimpsed a dog, not just any dog, but one wearing what looked like a special vest. The animal moved with purpose alongside a tall officer, both heading toward the commotion. Sofia recognized immediately that this wasn't a regular pet. This dog moved with the same alert confidence as her father's military dog. Without hesitation, Sofia stepped away from her waiting spot. Rex the dinosaur clutched firmly in one hand. Her light-up sneakers squeaked slightly against the polished floor as she navigated between hurried adults who barely registered the small child in their midst. The courthouse's soaring ceiling created an echo chamber of urgent voices, but Sofia remained focused on her destination. Elena, meanwhile, was frantically explaining her situation to her supervisor in a corner of the lobby. "The hearing starts in 15 minutes, and Judge Wilson specifically requested me for this case," she said, glancing back to check on Sofia. Her heart dropped when she didn't immediately spot her daughter. "Sofia," she called out, her voice lost in the general din of the busy courthouse. Across the lobby, Sofia had made her way surprisingly close to the police dog. From her vantage point, barely 3 feet tall, the world of adults formed a forest of legs and briefcases that she navigated with the nimbleness of a child who knew exactly what she wanted. And what she wanted was to meet this dog who reminded her so much of her father's partner. Officer Derek Jackson was focused entirely on the developing situation with the resistant defendant. His partner Titan stood at attention beside him, the Belgian Malinois's muscular body perfectly still except for his alert eyes tracking every movement. Titan was not a dog that anyone approached casually. His training had made him exceptional at apprehension work, and his imposing presence alone had diffused many potentially violent situations. The defendant was finally brought under control, and the momentary crisis passed. It was then that Officer Jackson felt something unusual. Titan's ears had shifted. His attention diverted. This was extraordinarily rare during active duty. Following his partner's gaze, Jackson was shocked to see a tiny girl in a purple dress standing just feet away, staring directly at his police dog with unblinking interest. "Hey there," Jackson said with concern, instinctively placing a protective hand on Titan's harness. "You shouldn't be over here, little one. Where's your mom or dad?" Sophia didn't answer him. Her attention remained fixed entirely on Titan, as though the two were engaged in some silent communication incomprehensible to everyone else. The hardened K-9 officer felt an unfamiliar sensation and certainty. Titan was not a therapy dog. He was a working police K-9 with strict protocols about public interaction. Yet something about the child's fearless approach gave Jackson pause. "Sophia." Elena's panicked voice cut through the lobby as she finally spotted her daughter near the police officer and his imposing dog. She rushed forward, apologies already forming on her lips, terrified that her child had disturbed a working police dog. But what Elena saw as she approached stopped her mid-stride. Her daughter and the police dog were locked in what could only be described as a mutual assessment, neither intimidated by the other. Officer Jackson appeared as puzzled as she was by the unusual standoff. "I'm so sorry, officer," Elena began, reaching for her daughter's hand. She knows better than to approach working dogs. Her father works with military dogs overseas, and I think it's all right. "Ma'am," Jackson interrupted, his voice softer than his usual official tone. "No harm done. I've just never seen Titan so interested in a civilian before, especially a child." What none of them realized in that moment was that this chance encounter in the courthouse lobby was just the beginning. Within hours, little Sophia Martinez would make her way into courtroom 305, where her interaction with Titan would change not just a contentious custody hearing, but the entire approach to family court in Fairfield County. Officer Derek Jackson stood at attention near courtroom 305, his partner Titan sitting regally beside him. The Belgian Malinois had earned his reputation as the most intimidating canine in the department. Criminals had been known to confess at the mere sight of his amber eyes and powerful stance. Even fellow officers kept a respectful distance. Jackson noticed the little girl in a purple dress staring at them from across the hall, and he subtly shifted Titan away. Children usually fear the dog, and that's how Jackson preferred it. The partnership between Officer Jackson and Titan had been forged through intense training and real-world danger. 3 years earlier, Jackson had been paired with the then 2-year-old Belgian Malinois after the department received a Homeland Security grant for expanding their K-9 unit. From the beginning, their connection had been different from the typical handler-dog relationship. Titan had washed out to previous K-9 programs for being too intense and unresponsive to correction. He was days away from being deemed unsuitable for police work when Jackson first met him. Jackson himself carried a reputation within the Fairfield Police Department. After serving the tours in Afghanistan as a military police officer, he'd returned home with a purple heart and a demeanor that kept most colleagues at arm's length. His captain had paired him with Titan. As a last resort, for both of them the officer too rigid for partnership with other humans, the dog too dominant for typical handlers. "You two deserve each other," Captain Rivera had said, not entirely kindly. When introducing them, what no one expected was how perfectly their personalities would align. Within weeks, Titan responded to Jackson's commands with a precision that astonished the K-9 training officers. Jackson, for his part, seemed to understand the dog's psychology in ways previous handlers couldn't grasp. They communicated with subtle cues nearly invisible to observers. A slight shift in Jackson's weight, a barely perceptible tilt of Titan's ears. They became the department's most effective K-9 team, specializing in apprehension and narcotics detection. But their success came with an unintended consequence: isolation. Jackson rarely socialized with other officers, preferring to spend his off-duty hours with Titan at his small ranch house on the outskirts of town. The dog lived with him, slept in his bedroom, and accompanied him almost everywhere. For his part, Titan had developed an aloofness toward anyone who wasn't Jackson. The K-9 tolerated necessary interactions with veterinarians and other officers, but his body language made it clear these were professional courtesies, not relationships. Standing now outside courtroom 305, Jackson mentally reviewed the day's assignment. Judge Wilson was presiding over a custody battle between local real estate magnate Robert Chambers and his ex-wife, Dr. Elise Chambers, chief of surgery at Fairfield Memorial. The case had attracted media attention due to allegations of emotional abuse and questions about the couple's 7-year-old twins. Jackson and Titan had been specifically requested after Robert Chambers had made veiled threats. During preliminary hearings, Officer Jackson, the bailiff, nodded as he approached from inside the courtroom. Judge Wilson wants you and Titan positioned inside near the gallery entrance. Chambers' attorney just filed a last-minute motion that's likely to escalate tensions. Jackson acknowledged the instruction with a curt nod, his face maintaining the impassive expression he perfected over years of service. As he prepared to enter the courtroom, he noticed the little girl in purple again, now holding her mother's hand as they waited near the court translator's entrance. Something about the child's fearless stare unsettled him. Most children either feared Titan or tried to pet him. Both reactions Jackson had protocols for handling. This little girl didn't either. She simply observed with unnerving intensity. "Come on, Titan," he murmured, giving the command to heel as they entered the courtroom. The atmosphere inside was charged with tension. Attorney teams sat at opposite tables, surrounded by stacks of documents and whispering paralegals. In the gallery, family members and journalists filled nearly every seat. Jackson positioned himself and Titan exactly where the bailiff had indicated, giving them a clear view of both the judge's bench and the gallery entrance. As the courtroom settled, Jackson noticed the translator, the mother of the little girl, being escorted to her position near the witness stand. To his surprise, the child accompanied her, taking a seat in a chair specifically brought in to accommodate her. Jackson frowned slightly. Courtrooms weren't typically places for children, especially during high-conflict hearings. Judge Harriet Wilson entered, her presence commanding immediate silence. At 62, she had served on the bench for over 2 decades and was known for her no-nonsense approach to family court matters. She acknowledged Jackson and Titan with a brief nod before turning her attention to the proceedings. "Before we begin," Judge Wilson addressed the courtroom, "I want to establish that today's hearing will remain civil and productive. The presence of Officer Jackson and his K-9 partner should remind everyone that outbursts will not be tolerated." Her gaze lingered pointedly on Robert Chambers, whose jaw visibly tightened. As the attorneys began presenting their arguments, Jackson maintained his professional vigilance while observing the dynamics in the room. Robert Chambers exuded entitlement, occasionally whispering aggressively to his attorney. Dr. Elise Chambers sat straight-backed and composed, though Jackson noted the slight tremor in her hands when her ex-husband's allegations were read into the record. Titan remained perfectly still beside him, but Jackson sensed a subtle shift in the dog's awareness. Following his partner's line of sight, he realized Titan was watching the little girl, who stared back with equal interest. It was unusual behavior for the K-9, who typically ignored civilians unless specifically directed to engage with them. The hearing progressed through technical legal arguments about financial disclosures and parenting schedules. Jackson maintained his position while monitoring the increasingly hostile body language from Robert Chambers. When the man's attorney presented a motion to restrict Dr. Chambers' access to the children during her hospital on-call periods, the tension in the room escalated noticeably. "Your Honor, these accusations are baseless and designed solely to interfere with my client's career," Dr. Chambers' attorney argued. "Mr. Chambers has repeatedly stated his belief that his ex-wife should, and I quote from text messages submitted as evidence, quit her job and be a real mother." Robert Chambers suddenly stood, his face flushed with anger. "Those children need their mother, not some hired help watching them while she cuts people open." Judge Wilson banged her gavel sharply. "Mr. Chambers, sit down immediately." Jackson stepped forward slightly, giving Titan a subtle hand signal that increased his alert status. The dog's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, but the message was clear to anyone familiar with Police K-9 South. The situation was being monitored with heightened attention. As Robert Chambers reluctantly returned to his seat, Jackson noticed something extraordinary. Titan's attention had diverted completely from the potential threat, his focus entirely on the little girl across the courtroom. In their 3 years together, Jackson had never seen his partner break concentration during an active security situation. The child was watching Titan with the same focused intensity, completely unperturbed by the adult conflict unfolding around her. For reasons Jackson couldn't explain, the connection between his hardened police dog and this fearless 3-year-old struck him as significant in ways he couldn't yet understand. What Jackson didn't know was that this unusual bond would soon play a pivotal role in one of the most extraordinary courtroom moments in Judge Wilson's long career. A moment that would begin with a whispered secret and end with a revelation that would change everyone involved. Sophia, with the fearlessness only a 3-year-old possesses, toddled directly toward Titan. Courthouse staff rose mid-conversation. The security guard reached for his radio. Officer Jackson raised his hand to halt the approaching child, but too late. She stood directly before the police dog, their eyes perfectly level. The mighty Titan, who could bring down armed suspects on command, tilted his head curiously at this tiny human. The entire courthouse lobby held its collective breath as Sophia reached out one chubby hand toward the dog's muzzle. The morning's hearing had reached a tense recess after Robert Chambers' outburst. Judge Wilson had ordered a 30-minute break, sternly instructing both legal teams to recalibrate their approach before returning. As the courtroom emptied, Elena Martinez knelt beside her daughter. "Mija, you're being so good, but we need to stay here a little longer," she explained, smoothing Sophia's dark curls. "Would you like a snack?" Sophia nodded, her eyes still tracking Officer Jackson and Titan as they repositioned themselves near the courtroom doors. Elena reached into her bag for the container of apple slices and crackers she'd hastily packed. That morning, as she searched, her phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor, requesting immediate clarification on a translated document. "1 second, Sophia," Elena said, quickly typing a response, while balancing the open snack container on her knee. In that moment of divided attention, Sophia made her decision. With Rex the dinosaur clutched firmly in one hand, she slid from her chair and began walking purposefully across the now empty courtroom, toward the magnificent dog that had captured her imagination. Her light-up sneakers made soft squeaking sounds against the polished floor, but Elena, focused on the urgent text exchange, didn't immediately notice her daughter's departure. Officer Jackson stood at parade rest near the doors, mentally reviewing the morning's developments. The case was proving even more volatile than expected, with Robert Chambers showing clear signs of escalating anger. Jackson made a mental note to position Titan closer to the plaintiff's table. When proceedings resumed, he was deep in tactical planning when Titan's ears suddenly pricked forward the dog's signal that something unexpected had entered his awareness perimeter. Jackson looked down at his partner, then followed Titan's gaze across the courtroom. The little girl in the purple dress was walking directly toward them with determined steps, her expression serious and focused. Jackson immediately scanned for the mother, spotting her still seated but distracted by her phone. "Miss," he called out, his voice instinctively softening from its usual authoritative tone. "You need to go back to your mom." Sophia continued her approach, seemingly deaf to his instruction. Jackson stepped slightly forward, extending his hand in the universal stop gesture. "Please stay back from the dog," he said more firmly. "He's working." Several courthouse employees who had remained in the courtroom during recess noticed the situation unfolding. The court reporter half rose from her seat, concern evident on her face. The bailiff moved toward the child from his position near the judge's chambers, but before any adult could intercept her, Sophia stopped directly in front of Titan. The Belgian Malinois, trained to maintain absolute focus and composure in chaotic situations, stared at the small human with an intensity that Jackson had previously only seen directed at suspects or search targets. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The child and the police dog regarded each other in perfect stillness. Jackson felt frozen, caught between protocol and the strange to blow before him. Titan had not given any indication of aggression, quite the opposite. The dog seemed almost transfixed. Then, with the innocence of a child who didn't understand the concept of boundaries, Sophia extended her hand toward Titan's face. Several gasps echoed through the courtroom. The bailiff lunged forward, but stopped when Jackson raised his hand slightly against every expectation. Titan remained perfectly still, allowing the tiny fingers to hover just inches from his sensitive nose. Jackson watched in astonishment as his partner, the dog, who required special handling by the veterinary staff, who allowed only Jackson to touch him during training, lowered his head slightly toward the child's hand. "He looked like Rex," Sophia said matter-of-factly, her voice carrying in the hushed courtroom. Jackson blinked in confusion. "Rex, my daddy's dog," she explained, holding up her stuffed dinosaur with her other hand. "But that's Rex too. Daddy named him after his work dog." Understanding dawned on Jackson. "Your daddy works with dogs?" Sophia nodded solemnly. "He's a soldier. His dog finds bad things that can hurt people. Before Jackson could respond, Elena's voice cut through the courtroom. Sophia. She rushed forward, panic evident in her quick steps and wide eyes. I'm so sorry, officer. She slipped away while I was... It's all right, Mom. Jackson interrupted, his voice gentler than it had been all day. No harm done. He looked down at Titan, who remained uncharacteristically focused on the child. Though I have to say, this is unusual behavior from my partner. Elena reached for Sophia's hand, but the little girl wasn't quite ready to leave. Can I pet him? She asked, looking directly at Jackson. I know how. Daddy showed me the right way with Rex. Jackson hesitated. Department protocol was clear. Working K9 South were not petting attractions. Titan, in particular, was not a dog accustomed to civilian contact. Yet something about this interaction felt significant in ways Jackson couldn't articulate. Sophia, we don't pet working dogs, Elena began to explain, but Jackson made a split-second decision. Actually, he said, kneeling down to the child's level, Titan is on a break right now too. He looked at his partner, giving the subtle hand signal that indicated a momentary release from alert status. If you're very gentle, and you approach from the side like you were going to, you can give him one pet. Elena looked surprised, but didn't object as Jackson guided Sophia through the proper approach. The little girl, showing remarkable restraint for her age, slowly brought her hand to the side of Titan's neck, stroking the short fur with gentle fingertips. What happened next astonished everyone watching. Titan, the dog known throughout the department for his aloofness, leaned slightly into the child's touch. A barely audible sigh escaped the powerful animal, and his alert posture softened almost imperceptibly. He's sad, Sophia announced with the confidence certainly only children possess. Jackson tilted his head. What makes you say that? Sophia continued her gentle petting. His eyes look like Daddy's when he has to say goodbye on the computer. The simple observation struck Jackson with unexpected force. He'd never considered that Titan's intensity might mask something else. Something the child, unburdened by preconceptions, could see clearly from the entrance to her chambers. Judge Wilson observed the extraordinary interaction. She had returned early from recess, intending to review some documents before proceedings resumed. Instead, she found herself witnessing something that, in 20 years on the bench, she had never seen before, a moment of pure, unguarded connection, cutting through the adversarial atmosphere that typically dominated her courtroom. What no one realized yet was that this encounter was merely prelude. The true moment that would change everything was still to come when a whispered secret would pass from a 3-year-old to a police dog, and eventually reshape the way an entire courthouse understood its purpose. Judge Harriet Wilson's courtroom was packed for the high-profile custody battle between a local celebrity and his ex-wife. Tensions erupted when the father's attorney presented shocking evidence. As shouting filled the room, Judge Wilson banged her gavel repeatedly. Officer Jackson and Titan entered to restore order, the dog's presence immediately commanding silence. From the back row, where Elena had settled with Sophia, the little girl watched the proceedings with unusual intensity, her eyes never leaving the police dog now standing guard near the witness stand. The recess had ended, and courtroom 305 once again filled to capacity. News of the morning's heated exchanges had spread throughout the courthouse, drawing additional spectators hoping to witness the drama firsthand. Court officers had to turn away several people when the gallery reached maximum occupancy. Robert Chambers sat at the plaintiff's table, his expensive suit and confident posture projecting the image of the successful real estate developer the community knew him to be. His attorney, Martin Weber, a sharp-featured man known for his aggressive litigation style, arranged documents with practiced efficiency across the aisle. Dr. Elise Chambers maintained her composure despite the morning's accusations. Her attorney, Sandra Patel, whispered reassurances as they prepared for the next round of testimony. Elena had returned to her translator's position after securing permission from her supervisor for Sophia to remain seated in a chair against the wall behind her. She had provided her daughter with a coloring book and crayons, with strict instructions to stay quiet. Officer Jackson and Titan had taken up a new position closer to the front of the courtroom, as Jackson had determined that Robert Chambers presented the most likely security concern. Judge Wilson entered with a gravity that silenced the murmuring crowd. Court is back in session, she announced, her voice carrying authority earned through decades on the bench. She glanced briefly at Sophia before addressing the attorneys. I trust everyone has had time to reconsider their approach. Mr. Weber, you may call your next witness. Weber stood with the fluid confidence of a man accustomed to courtroom theatrics. Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Miss Patricia Dawson. A slender woman in her late 50s approached the witness stand. As the twins' longtime nanny, her testimony would carry significant weight regarding the children's daily care. After being sworn in, Ms. Dawson settled into the witness chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Weber approached with calculated precision. Ms. Dawson, how long have you been employed by the Chambers family? 8 years, sir, since the twins were born. And during that time, who would you say has been the primary caregiver for the children? Ms. Dawson hesitated, her eyes flicking briefly toward Dr. Chambers. I've provided much of their day-to-day care, under the direction of both parents. Weber's expression hardened slightly at the equivocal answer. Let me be more specific. How often is Dr. Chambers physically present when the children are awake on weekdays? Objection. Your Honor, Sandra Patel interjected. Counsel is leading the witness and framing the question to create a false impression of my client's parenting. Sustained. Judge Wilson ruled. Rephrase. Mr. Weber. Weber nodded. Undeterred. Ms. Dawson, please describe the typical weekday schedule for the Chambers children before the separation, including which parent was present at which times. For the next several minutes, Ms. Dawson detailed the family's routine, how she arrived at 5:30 a.m. to help get the children ready for school, how Dr. Chambers would often leave for the hospital before the children woke, and how Mr. Chambers typically handled morning drop-offs on his way to his office. As the questioning continued, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew increasingly tense. When Weber displayed a calendar showing Dr. Chambers' hospital schedule overlaid with the children's school events, Robert Chambers leaned forward in his chair, his expression darkening. Ms. Dawson, based on this calendar, how many of the children's school performances did Dr. Chambers miss in the past year due to work commitments? I believe it was 5 or 6 events, the nanny answered carefully. And how many did Mr. Chambers miss? Only one, when he was at a conference in Chicago. Weber nodded with satisfaction. Now, Ms. Dawson, have you ever observed Dr. Chambers in a state of extreme stress or exhaustion after her hospital shifts that might have impacted her interactions with the children? Objection. Patel stood abruptly. This question calls for speculation and seeks to characterize normal fatigue, experienced by many working parents, as something negative. Before Judge Wilson could rule, Robert Chambers suddenly interjected. Just tell the truth about how she comes home and barely acknowledges them, Mr. Chambers. Judge Wilson's gavel came down sharply. You will remain silent or be removed from my courtroom. The outburst had broken the tenuous decorum of the proceedings. Robert Chambers turned to glare at his ex-wife, his face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous, he said loudly. Everyone knows surgeons make terrible parents. Those kids need stability, not a mother who prioritizes her patients over her own children. Your Honor, both attorneys exclaimed simultaneously. Judge Wilson's gavel struck again. Mr. Weber, control your client immediately. She turned to the bailiff. Prepare to remove Mr. Chambers if there's one more outburst. As tension escalated, Officer Jackson gave Titan the subtle hand signal that increased his alert status. The Belgian Malinois straightened, his attention fixed on Robert Chambers, who continued muttering angrily to his attorney from her position against the wall. Sophia watched the unfolding scene with the remarkable focus that had earlier caught Jackson's attention. While other spectators followed the verbal exchanges, the little girl's gaze remained on Titan, studying his reactions to the rising emotions in the room. Dr. Chambers had maintained her composure throughout the accusations, but now tears glistened in her eyes. Your Honor, she said quietly but firmly, may I address the court? Judge Wilson considered the unusual request. This is irregular, Dr. Chambers, but given the circumstances, you may make a brief statement. Dr. Chambers stood, her professional demeanor momentarily giving way to raw emotion. I love my children more than anything in this world. Yes, I have a demanding career, one that saves lives, but I have never, not once, placed my patients above my children's well-being. What I have done is show them that a woman can be both a dedicated mother and excel in her profession. Her voice broke slightly. The example I'm setting for my daughter especially, spares the feminist manifesto. Robert Chambers interrupted, rising to his feet. This isn't about your career. It's about your absence. Those kids practically raised themselves with a nanny while you were playing hero at the hospital. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Spectators gasped and murmured. Attorneys shouted objections. Judge Wilson's repeated gavel strikes barely penetrated the noise. At her signal, the bailiff moved toward Robert Chambers, who continued his tirade. Gesturing wildly toward his ex-wife, Officer Jackson stepped forward, Titan moving in perfect synchronization beside him. The dog's presence created an immediate corridor of silence that spread through the courtroom. As people became aware of the K-9 unit's advance, Robert Chambers faltered mid-sentence as Titan's amber eyes locked onto him. The dog had made no threatening movement, had not growled or barked, but his focused attention conveyed unmistakable authority. "Mr. Chambers," Officer Jackson said calmly, "please return to your seat." For a tense moment, it seemed the real estate developer might refuse. Then, with a final glare at his ex-wife, he sat down heavily, his attorney whispering urgently in his ear. Judge Wilson surveyed her courtroom with evident displeasure. "We will take another recess," she announced. "When we return, I expect professional conduct from everyone, or contempt charges will be filed." She turned to Officer Jackson. "Please remain in the courtroom during the break." As the judge exited to her chambers, the tension in the room dissipated only slightly. Dr. Chambers dabbed at her eyes with a tissue while her attorney spoke reassuringly. Robert Chambers continued his heated discussion with Weber, though now in hushed tones. Throughout the chaotic scene, one person had remained perfectly still: Sophia, while adults around her had reacted with shock or anxiety to the conflict. The 3-year-old had observed with an almost preternatural calm, her eyes moving between the adults, the judge, and finally settling again on Titan. No one yet realized that this small child, present only by circumstance, would soon transform the bitter proceedings in a way no legal argument could accomplish, with a whispered observation that would pierce through the adults' entrenched positions and remind everyone of what truly mattered. During a tense recess, Sophia slipped away from her distracted mother. Security cameras captured her determined journey across the courtroom toward Titan. Judge Wilson, returning early from Chambers, watched transfixed as the child stood on tiptoes before the intimidating K-9. Sophia cupped her tiny hands around his ear and whispered something that made the hardened police dog's ears perk up. Judge Wilson, close enough to overhear, gasped audibly. The courtroom fell silent as tears welled in the normally stoic judge's eyes. The second recess had scattered the courtroom's occupants throughout the building. Elena had stepped into the hallway to consult with her supervisor about the increasingly volatile nature of the proceedings and whether additional translation services might be needed. If the hearing extended into a second day, she had settled Sophia in a chair near the court reporter's station with a juice box and the remainder of her snacks, asking the friendly stenographer to keep an eye on her daughter. "I'll just be right outside the door," Elena had explained. 2 minutes, tops. The court reporter had nodded agreeably, but was soon called away by the clerk to clarify some statements from the morning transcript. In the momentary gap of supervision, Sophia saw her opportunity. With the quiet determination that had characterized her actions all morning, she slid from her chair. Rex the dinosaur clutched firmly in her hand. Officer Jackson stood near the judge's bench, reviewing security protocols with the bailiff. Titan sat at attention beside him, seemingly at rest, but constantly scanning the courtroom with alert eyes. The Belgian Malinois was the first to notice Sophia's movement, his ears shifting slightly in her direction before his head turned to track her progress. Jackson, attuned to his partner's subtle signals, glanced over his shoulder. The little girl was making her way across the empty courtroom with deliberate steps, her purple dress contrasting sharply with the muted browns and blues of the legal setting. He excused himself from the bailiff and turned to intercept her. "Hey there," he said, gently, crouching down to her level. "Your mom is looking for you, I bet." Sophia stopped a few feet away, regarding him with serious dark eyes. "Is your dog still on a break?" she asked, ignoring his implied suggestion that she should return to her seat. Jackson hesitated. Department protocols were clear about civilian interactions with K-9 officers, especially children. The brief exception he'd made earlier was already stretching the rules. Yet something about this child's focused intensity made him reluctant to simply redirect her. "He's working right now," Jackson explained. "When dogs are working, they need to stay focused. Like how your dad's dog Rex needs to focus on finding dangerous things." Sophia considered this information thoughtfully. "But he looks sad again," she said with the simple certainty of a child stating an obvious fact. Before Jackson could respond, the door to the judge's chambers opened. Judge Wilson emerged, earlier than expected, her arms full of reference materials. She paused, taking in the tableau before her. The uniformed officer crouched down, speaking with the tiny girl. The imposing police dog watching them both with unusual interest. "Is everything all right, Officer Jackson?" Judge Wilson asked, setting her books on the bench. Jackson straightened immediately. "Yes, Your Honor. The young lady was just asking about Titan. I was explaining that he's working." Judge Wilson studied Sophia with newfound interest. During the earlier commotion, she had noticed the child's remarkable composure, so at odds with the adult's emotional displays. Now, seeing her standing confidently before the canine officer and his intimidating partner, Wilson was struck by the contrast between the girl's tiny stature and her evident fearlessness. "You're the translator's daughter, aren't you?" Judge Wilson asked, her tone gentler than her usual courtroom voice. Sophia nodded. "My name is Sophia Martinez," she answered with surprising clarity. "My mama helps people understand each other when they speak different words." A smile touched Judge Wilson's lips. "That's a very good description of what your mother does." She glanced at Officer Jackson. "And you seem quite interested in Officer Jackson's partner." "He's like my daddy's dog," Sophia explained, holding up her stuffed dinosaur. "This is Rex. Daddy named him after his real dog. They find things that can hurt people." Understanding dawned on Judge Wilson's face. "Your father is in the military?" Sophia nodded solemnly. "He's far away. Mama says he keeps people safe." Something in the child's matter-of-fact acceptance of her father's dangerous work touched Judge Wilson. After 40 years in the legal system, 20 as a family court judge, she had developed a necessary, wide-detached approach to the emotional aspects of custody disputes. Yet this child's simple presence in her courtroom today had repeatedly drawn her attention, like a small but insistent reminder of what truly mattered beyond legal arguments. What happened next occurred so quickly that security cameras would later be reviewed multiple times by courthouse staff trying to understand the sequence of events. Sophia, apparently deciding that the adult's conversation was finished, stepped past Officer Jackson and walked directly to Titan. Before anyone could react, she stood directly in front of the police dog, their eyes perfectly level. "Miss Sophia," Jackson began, moving forward with professional concern. But Judge Wilson raised her hand slightly, halting him. Something about this moment felt significant. A brief intersection of innocence and authority that demanded witnessing, rather than intervention. Sophia reached up with both hands, cupping them around Titan's alert ear. She leaned forward and whispered something that neither adult could hear. The effect on the dog was immediate and unprecedented. Titan's ears pricked forward, his head tilted slightly, and then most astonishingly the corner of his mouth seemed to relax in what could almost be described as a softening of his usually stern expression. Judge Wilson, standing closer than Officer Jackson, caught the child's whispered words. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes suddenly bright with unexpected emotion. Sophia stepped back from Titan, apparently satisfied with her communication. She looked up at Judge Wilson, with a direct gaze that seemed to characterize all her interactions. "He understands," she said simply. At that moment, Elena Martinez rushed into the courtroom, her face flushed with worry. "Sophia, there you are." She hurried forward, apologies already forming on her lips. "I'm so sorry, Your Honor. She was supposed to stay with." "It's perfectly all right, Ms. Martinez," Judge Wilson interrupted, her voice carrying an unusual warmth. "Your daughter hasn't caused any disruption." She looked down at Sophia with newfound respect. "Quite the contrary, in fact." Elena looked confused, glancing between her daughter, the judge, and Officer Jackson, trying to understand what had transpired in her brief absence. Officer Jackson himself appeared slightly bewildered, studying his canine partner with professional concern. Titan had returned to his alert posture, but something subtle had changed in the dog's demeanor, a slight relaxation around the eyes, a marginally softer line to his powerful shoulders. "We'll be resuming shortly," Judge Wilson said, gathering her composure. "Ms. Martinez, please ensure your daughter remains with you for the remainder of the proceedings." Her tone was official, but her expression remained unusually gentle. "I believe her presence today may prove more significant than any of us anticipated." As court personnel began filtering back into the room, preparing for the session to resume, Judge Wilson retreated briefly to her chambers, alone at her desk. She pressed her fingertips against her closed eyelids, trying to process what she had just witnessed and, more importantly, what she had overheard. The simple words whispered by a 3-year-old to a police dog had cut through years of judicial detachment, reminding Harriet Wilson not just of the law she had sworn to uphold, but of the deeper purpose behind it. When she returned to the bench moments later, something fundamental had shifted in her approach to the bitter custody battle before her, shift that would soon become apparent to everyone in courtroom 305. When proceedings resumed, Judge Wilson's demeanor had transformed completely. She addressed the warring parents with newfound compassion yet unmistakable authority. "Today I witnessed something extraordinary," she announced to the confused courtroom. "A child who reminded me why these decisions matter." She revealed what Sophia had whispered to Titan. "My abuelita says, even the scariest dogs are just keeping someone they love safe." The judge's landmark ruling prioritized the children's emotional security above all else, citing the wisdom from our youngest attendee. The gallery buzzed with whispers as the courtroom returned to full capacity. Attorneys shuffled papers nervously, sensing something had changed though unable to identify what. Robert and Elise Chambers sat rigidly at their respective tables, avoiding eye contact with each other after the morning's heated exchanges. Officer Jackson had repositioned Titan closer to Robert Chambers' table, a precautionary measure given the real estate developer's earlier outburst. Elena Martinez had returned to her translator's position, Sophia now firmly on her lap rather than in a separate chair. The little girl seemed content with this arrangement, though her dark eyes continued their thoughtful observation of the proceedings, occasionally settling on Titan with evident interest. Judge Harriet Wilson emerged from her chambers with a deliberate stride that silenced the courtroom instantly. Those who knew her well, the court reporter, the bailiff, the clerks who had worked with her for years, noticed something different in her bearing. The stern efficiency that typically characterized her courtroom management had been replaced by something more measured, more contemplative. "Court is back in session," she announced, settling into her chair with unusual grace, rather than immediately directing the attorneys to continue their examination. Judge Wilson folded her hands on the bench and surveyed the room thoughtfully. "Before we proceed," she began, her voice carrying an undertone that commanded complete attention, "I want to address some concerns about the direction this hearing has taken." Robert Chambers shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His attorney, Martin Weber, straightened his tie with a nervous gesture. "Family court," Judge Wilson continued, "exists for one purpose only: to serve the best interests of children, not to adjudicate adult grievances, not to allocate blame, not to punish perceived wrongs between parents." She paused, letting her words settle over the room. "Today, I have observed a concerning pattern in these proceedings, a focus on winning rather than on what would truly benefit the Chambers children." Dr. Elise Chambers looked down at her hands, her expression a complex mixture of vindication and regret. Robert Chambers began to whisper urgently to his attorney, but Judge Wilson raised her hand. "Mr. Chambers, I am not finished." The real estate developer fell silent, his face flushing. Shortly before we resumed, Judge Wilson continued, "I witnessed something extraordinary in this courtroom, something that has, I must admit, shifted my perspective on this case rather profoundly." She glanced briefly toward Sophia, who was playing quietly with her dinosaur toy in her mother's lap. "Our youngest attendee today provided me with an unexpected reminder of what truly matters in these proceedings." Confusion rippled through the courtroom. Weber exchanged puzzled glances with his paralegal, Sandra Patel. Dr. Chambers' attorney leaned forward with newfound interest. "Your Honor," Weber ventured cautiously, "I'm not sure I understand how a child uninvolved in these proceedings could—" "Mr. Weber," Judge Wilson interrupted, "I have presided over custody disputes for 20 years. In that time, I have reviewed countless psychological evaluations, parenting assessments, and expert testimonies. Yet sometimes the most profound insights come from unexpected sources." She paused. Miss Sophia Martinez, who was here today by circumstance rather than design, approached Officer Jackson's K-9 partner during the recess. What she whispered to that dog, Judge Wilson's voice caught slightly before she regained her composure, was a wisdom that many adults in this room would do well to consider. The courtroom was utterly silent now, all eyes moving between the judge and the little girl, who seemed oblivious to her sudden centrality in the proceedings. She said, and I quote, "My abuelita says even the scariest dogs are just keeping someone they love safe." Dr. Chambers' hand flew to her mouth. Several spectators exchanged confused glances, not immediately grasping the significance. Robert Chambers frowned, looking between the judge and the child with evident bewilderment. "Your Honor," Weber began again, "while that's certainly charming, I fail to see the relevance to these proceedings." Judge Wilson fixed him with a penetrating gaze. "The relevance, Mr. Weber, is that this child's observation perfectly crystallizes what I have observed today. Both you and Ms. Patel have presented your clients as fierce advocates for their children. Both Dr. and Mr. Chambers clearly believe they are fighting to protect their children's best interests. Yet in that fierce advocacy, that determination to win custody, you have all lost sight of the fact that these parents are not enemies. They are simply trying, however imperfectly, to keep safe those they love." A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. Dr. Chambers was openly weeping now, though silently. Robert Chambers stared straight ahead, his jaw working as he processed the judge's words. "Therefore," Judge Wilson continued, "I am taking the unusual step of redirecting these proceedings effective immediately." She turned to the court clerk. "Please contact Dr. Michael Brennan's office. I want him in my chambers within the hour." Dr. Brennan was a respected family psychologist who often served as a court-appointed mediator in particularly contentious custody cases. "Your Honor," both attorneys exclaimed simultaneously. Judge Wilson raised her hand. "My decision is made. This hearing is suspended pending mediation with Dr. Brennan. I am not satisfied that the adversarial approach is serving the Chambers' children." She turned her attention directly to Robert and Elise Chambers. "I want to be perfectly clear. I have reviewed the extensive documentation in this case. I understand Dr. Chambers' demanding schedule as chief of surgery. I recognize Mr. Chambers' more flexible work arrangements. As a real estate developer, I acknowledge that both of you love your children deeply." Judge Wilson leaned forward slightly. "But what I witnessed today was to parents so caught up in their own narrative of being the better parent that you've lost sight of your shared goal, raising happy, secure children who benefit from both your influences." She straightened in her chair. "Therefore, I am making a preliminary ruling that will stand until mediation is complete. The Chambers' children will continue with the current week-on, week-off arrangement." However, she fixed Robert Chambers with a firm gaze. "There will be no disparagement of Dr. Chambers' professional commitments. Her work saves lives, and your children should be taught to respect that contribution to society." She turned to Dr. Elise Chambers. "Similarly, Dr. Chambers, you will work with hospital administration to ensure that your schedule accommodates at least 2 school events per month. Your presence at these functions is non-negotiable." Judge Wilson addressed both parents. "You will both meet with Dr. Brennan twice weekly for the next month to develop a comprehensive co-parenting plan that recognizes each of your strengths and accommodates your professional responsibilities." The courtroom remained silent, absorbing the unexpected turn the proceedings had taken. Judge Wilson's gaze swept the room once more before settling briefly on Sophia, who had fallen asleep against her mother's shoulder. Rex the dinosaur clutched against her chest. "This court is in recess until further notice," Judge Wilson announced. Rising from the bench, "Mr. and Dr. Chambers, please remain for a moment to schedule your first session with Dr. Brennan." As the gallery began to clear, whispers erupted about the extraordinary intervention. Officer Jackson and Titan remained at their post, the officer's expression professionally neutral, though his eyes reflected thoughtful consideration of what had transpired. Elena Martinez gathered her translation materials one-handed, balancing her sleeping daughter with practiced ease. As she passed the bench, Judge Wilson stepped down to speak with her quietly. "Ms. Martinez," the judge said softly, careful not to wake Sophia, "please accept my thanks for your daughter's unexpected contribution today." Elena looked puzzled. "I'm sorry if she caused any disruption, Your Honor." Judge Wilson shook her head. "Quite the opposite, Ms. Martinez. Your daughter reminded this court of its true purpose in a way no legal argument could have accomplished." She glanced at the sleeping child with genuine respect. "You should be very proud." As Elena carried Sophia from the courtroom, neither she nor anyone else could have predicted how this small moment, a child's whispered observation to a police dog, would catalyze changes far beyond the Chambers' custody dispute, eventually transforming how family court functioned throughout Fairfield County. The story of Sophia and Titan exploded across social media overnight. National news crews descended on the courthouse, capturing footage of the unlikely friendship between the serious police dog and the fearless 3-year-old, Officer Jackson. found himself implementing a revolutionary K-9 community program, bringing Titan to schools and hospitals. The department's community relations transformed dramatically. Meanwhile, Judge Wilson began requiring all family court judges in her district to undergo special training in childhood trauma, all because one little girl saw past a fierce exterior. By the following morning, the extraordinary events in courtroom 305 had spread throughout the Fairfield County Courthouse. A court clerk who had witnessed Sophia's interaction with Titan shared the story. During her lunch break, a journalist covering the Chambers case mentioned the unusual intervention in his online article. The courthouse security guard, who had captured a brief video of Sophia whispering to the police dog, posted it to his personal social media account with the caption, "Most amazing thing I've seen in 15 years working security, little girl tames the toughest K-9 in the department." The video went viral within hours. By Wednesday morning, local news vans lined the courthouse steps. The Fairfield Daily Chronicle ran a front-page headline, "Wisdom from the Mouths of Babes. How a 3-year-old changed a judge's mind." Regional television stations led their morning broadcasts with the story, showing the security footage that had been shared thousands of times overnight. Elena Martinez woke to dozens of missed calls and messages from friends, family, and journalists seeking interviews. She stared at her phone in disbelief, reading text after text about her daughter's sudden fame. Sophia, blissfully unaware of her newfound celebrity, sat at the kitchen table eating cereal and chatting with her stuffed dinosaur as though nothing extraordinary had happened. At the Fairfield Police Department, Officer Derek Jackson arrived for his shift to find the chief of police waiting in the parking lot. "Jackson," Chief Ramirez called, waving him over. "Got a minute?" Jackson approached with Titan at his side, noting the unusual tension in the chief's expression. "Something wrong, sir?" Chief Ramirez handed him a tablet displaying the viral video. "When were you planning to tell me about this?" Jackson watched the grainy security footage showing Sophia whispering to Titan in the courtroom. The video didn't capture the audio, but it clearly showed Judge Wilson's emotional reaction and Titan's unprecedented response. "I included it in my daily report, sir," Jackson said carefully. "It didn't seem like a security concern, just an unusual interaction." The chief shook his head, a smile breaking through his serious demeanor. "Not a security concern, Jackson. A public relations goldmine. I've had calls from the mayor's office, 3 television stations, and the superintendent of schools this morning." He gestured to the tablet. "People are calling this the whisper that changed Fairfield." The department's social media accounts have gained thousands of followers overnight. Jackson shifted uncomfortably as a decorated officer who valued his privacy and professionalism. "Sudden public attention was unwelcome, sir. With respect, I'm not interested in publicity. Titan and I have actual work. This is actual work." "Jackson," Chief Ramirez interrupted. "Community relations is police work. In case you haven't noticed, K-9 units don't always have the most positive public image these days. This video shows a different side, one we desperately need people to see." At the courthouse, Judge Harriet Wilson arrived through the private entrance to avoid the media gathered at the main doors. Her judicial assistant met her with an overflowing inbox. "The administrative judge wants to see you immediately," the assistant reported, hurrying to keep pace as Wilson strode toward her chambers. And the Bar Association president called twice. "They're talking about a community service award." Wilson stopped abruptly. "A what?" "For your ruling yesterday. It's being described as innovative jurisprudence centered on childhood emotional welfare, or something like that." The assistant consulted her notes. "Also, Dr. Brennan called. The chambers had their first mediation session this morning, and he said, and I quote, 'Something extraordinary happened.'" Judge Wilson absorbed this information silently, then continued to her chambers. Closing the door, she sank into her chair and stared at the framed law degree on her wall. In 20 years on the bench, she had issued thousands of rulings, written hundreds of opinions, and managed countless difficult cases, yet none had generated this level of attention, and all because a child had whispered a simple truth that had pierced through her judicial armor. Her phone rang. Displaying the administrative judge's number, Wilson took a deep breath and answered. "Harriet," Judge Michael Collins began without preamble. "I've just watched that video from your courtroom about 15 times. Every judge in the building is talking about it." "What exactly happened in there?" Wilson described the events in careful detail: Sophia's fearless approach to Titan, her whispered observation about scared dogs protecting loved ones, and how it had crystallized Wilson's thinking about the Chambers case. It made me realize I've been handling these high-conflict custody cases all wrong, she admitted. We get so caught up in determining which parent is better that we forget they're both just trying to protect their children. However imperfectly, there was a long pause on the line. Then, to Wilson's surprise, Judge Collins said, "I want to implement this approach across all family courts in the county." By afternoon, the story had reached national news outlets. A producer from Good Morning America left 3 messages for Elena, requesting an interview with Sophia. The courthouse public information officer fielded calls from journalists as far away as London and Tokyo. The viral video had struck a chord that transcended local interest. At the police department, Chief Ramirez called Jackson into a meeting with the community outreach coordinator and the mayor's public affairs liaison. They presented a proposal for a new program, Guardians and Guidance Canine South in community spaces. "We want to start bringing police dogs into schools, hospitals, and community centers," the outreach coordinator explained, "not just for demonstrations, but for meaningful interactions that help children and vulnerable populations see law enforcement differently." Jackson's initial reluctance began to fade as he reviewed the proposal. He thought about Sophia's fearless approach to Titan, her intuitive understanding that beneath the dog's intimidating exterior was a devoted protector. Perhaps there was value in showing that side of K9 work to the public. Titan isn't exactly a therapy dog, he pointed out. He's trained for apprehension and detection. That's precisely why he's perfect for this, the mayor's liaison countered. He represents the reality of police work, while demonstrating that even the most serious working dogs can connect with the community. At Fairfield Elementary School, Principal Diana Chen watched the viral video during her lunch break, an idea forming in her mind. The school had been struggling with increasing behavioral issues, particularly among children from homes affected by divorce or family instability. Chen immediately emailed her district superintendent, proposing a pilot program to bring elements of Judge Wilson's approach into the school's family engagement strategy. By Thursday, Dr. Michael Brennan's office was inundated with calls from family therapists across the state, all inquiring about the mediation techniques he had used with the Chamber's family. The simple reframing helping parents see their conflicts as misguided attempts to protect their children rather than competitions to be won was creating breakthrough moments in even the most entrenched custody battles. At home, Elena tried to maintain normalcy for Sophia, declining most interview requests and limiting her daughter's exposure to the sudden attention. But when Judge Wilson called personally to ask if Sophia might participate in a small ceremony to launch a new courthouse initiative, Elena cautiously agreed. "Your daughter has inadvertently started something important," Judge Wilson explained. "We're establishing a program to ensure that children involved in family court proceedings have advocates specifically focused on their emotional well-being, not just their legal interests. We're calling it the Whisper Program, and we'd be honored if Sophia would help us introduce it." Meanwhile, Officer Jackson found himself reconsidering his partnership with Titan. For 3 years, he had valued the dog primarily for his working abilities, his focus, his intensity, his unwavering obedience. Yet Sophia had seen something else in Titan, something Jackson himself had perhaps forgotten to acknowledge. Beneath the working exterior was a being capable of connection, of understanding, of response to gentle approach rather than command. As Jackson watched Titan that evening, resting on his bed in their shared home, he wondered what other aspects of his partner he had failed to recognize, and what other connections might be possible if he allowed himself to see beyond the professional facade they both maintained. What had begun as a child's innocent interaction with a police dog was rapidly evolving into something much larger, a movement that would transform how Fairfield County approached everything, from family court proceedings to community policing, all because a 3-year-old had whispered a simple truth that adults had somehow forgotten. 1 year later, Sophia, now 4 and missing her front teeth, stood proudly beside Titan at the courthouse steps. Hundreds gathered to witness the unveiling of a small bronze statue depicting a little girl whispering to a police dog. The mayor presented Sophia with a Civilian Bravery Award as Titan sat protectively beside her. Judge Wilson, now heading the county's new family reconciliation program, wiped away tears as she addressed the crowd. "Sometimes the smallest voices speak the most powerful truths," she said, while Sophia reached up to scratch Titan's ear, the once fearsome dog leaning contentedly into her touch. The late August sun bathed the Fairfield County Courthouse in golden light as crowds began gathering for the ceremony. Exactly 1 year had passed since Sofia Martinez had whispered her simple truth to a police dog, setting in motion changes that had transformed the community in ways no one could have predicted. The courthouse plaza had been decorated with banners, proclaiming 1 year of whispers, celebrating our community guardians. Rows of chairs faced a small stage erected beneath the building's grand columns. At the center of the plaza, covered by a blue velvet cloth, stood what everyone knew was the commission's statue, commemorating the moment that had gone viral and changed so many lives. Elena Martinez adjusted the collar of Sofia's new dress a deeper purple than the one she had worn a year ago, selected specially for the occasion. At 4 years old, Sofia had grown taller, lost her front teeth, and gained a remarkable self-possession that seemed to have been enhanced, rather than diminished by her unexpected fame. Remember, Mija, you just have to stand there with Officer Jackson and Titan, Elena reminded her daughter. The mayor will say some words, then Judge Wilson, and then they'll uncover the statue. You don't have to say anything unless you want to. Sofia nodded solemnly, clutching the newer version of Rex, the dinosaur. The original had been retired to a special shelf in her bedroom after being loved almost to pieces. Over the past year, is Daddy watching today? She asked, her most frequent question during the months since her father's deployment had ended, and he returned home. Yes, he has the perfect spot, right there. Elena pointed at where Staff Sergeant Marco Martinez stood near the front row, his dress uniform immaculate, his proud smile visible even from a distance. His unit had arranged a special assignment in Fairfield after his return, partly due to the attention his daughter had brought to military families through her viral moment. Across the plaza, Officer Derek Jackson stood with Titan, both looking surprisingly comfortable despite the crowds and cameras. The past year had changed them both in subtle but significant ways. Jackson's customary stern expression had softened, particularly when interacting with the community members who now greeted him by name. Titan, while still every inch the professional police dog on duty, had developed what the department jokingly called his Sofia protocol, an ability to transition between working mode and community interaction that had made him the perfect ambassador for the canine program. Judge Harriet Wilson approached them, elegant in a blue suit that intentionally eschewed her judicial robes for this community event. Officer Jackson, she greeted him warmly. How many schools have you and Titan visited this month? 12, Your Honor, Jackson replied with a slight smile, plus 3 hospitals and the Veterans Center. What had begun as a reluctant assignment had evolved into the most rewarding aspect of his career. The Guardians and Guidance program had expanded to every K-9 unit in the department, though Titan remained its most requested participant. And the training sessions for the new handlers? Judge Wilson inquired. Going well. We've incorporated the child interaction protocols into basic K-9 training now. Even the dogs primarily trained for detection work are learning the community engagement skills. Jackson paused, then added, it's changing the whole culture of the unit. Officers are requesting K-9 assignments who never would have considered it before. Mayor Gloria Chen joined them, elegant in a crimson blazer, a folder of notes in her hand. Are our guests of honor ready? She asked with the polished charm that had helped her win a landslide re-election after championing the community initiatives sparked by Sofia's courthouse moment. I believe they're just arriving, Judge Wilson replied, gesturing toward Elena and Sofia making their way through the crowd. People smiled and waved at the little girl, who responded with a small, dignified wave of her own, though numerous media outlets had sought interviews and appearances over the past year. Elena had carefully limited Sofia's public exposure, allowing only a few carefully selected events that served the community programs her daughter had inadvertently inspired. As the ceremony time approached, attendees took their seats. The front row held distinguished guests Robert and Elise Chambers sat side by side, their transformed relationship perhaps the most personal testament to the day's significance. After their mediated resolution, they had become vocal advocates for the cooperative co-parenting approach now standard in Judge Wilson's courtroom. Their twins, now 8, sat between them, healthy and thriving under the shared custody arrangement that prioritized their emotional well-being above parental competition. Dr. Michael Brennan, whose mediation practice had expanded to require 3 additional therapists, sat nearby. The Fairfield Police Department was represented by Chief Ramirez and several officers, whose community relationships had been strengthened through the new initiatives. School principals, hospital administrators, and community leaders filled the remaining seats, all connected by programs that had grown from a child's observation about a police dog. At precisely noon, Mayor Chen approached the podium. "Welcome, everyone, to this very special anniversary celebration. 1 year ago today, in the courtroom behind us, something remarkable happened. A 3-year-old girl named Sofia Martinez approached a police dog named Titan and whispered words that would change our community forever." The crowd applauded as Sofia was escorted to the stage by Officer Jackson, with Titan walking perfectly beside them. The once fierce K9 officer had developed a special protocol used only with Sofia's slightly relaxed posture that maintained his professional bearing, while acknowledging their unique connection. What began as a chance encounter, Mayor Chen continued, has grown into programs that have transformed our approach to family court, community policing, school counseling, and so much more. The Whisper program in our courts has ensured that over 300 children have received specialized advocacy during family proceedings. The Guardians and Guidance Initiative has brought Police K9 South into every school in our district, building trust between law enforcement and our youngest citizens. Hospital visits by Officer Jackson and Titan have brought comfort to children facing medical procedures. She turned toward the small girl standing beside the imposing dog. "Sophia, your bravery in approaching Titan that day showed us all that sometimes the barriers we perceive between us are just that, perceptions that can be overcome with courage and compassion." The mayor gestured to an aide, who approached with a small wooden box. "On behalf of the city of Fairfield, I am honored to present you with the first ever Civilian Bravery Award, created specifically to recognize those who bring our community together through extraordinary acts of courage." Sophia stepped forward, solemn and dignified despite missing her front teeth, to accept the small medal nestled in velvet. Staff Sergeant Martinez beamed from the front row, visibly fighting emotion as his daughter was honored. Next, Judge Wilson approached the microphone. The past year had changed her as much as anyone. The judge, who had once been known for her stern efficiency, was now recognized nationally for pioneering a more humanistic approach to family court. "Sometimes the smallest voices speak the most powerful truths," she began, her normally composed, judicial demeanor softening as she looked at Sophia. What this young lady whispered to Titan that day, that even the scariest dogs are just keeping someone they love safe, reminded all of us what lies beneath our professional exteriors, our conflicts, our protective instincts. At our core, we are all simply trying to safeguard what matters most to us. Judge Wilson gestured toward the cloth-covered statue. "Today, we unveil a permanent reminder of that truth, not just to commemorate a moment that touched our community, but to ensure that future generations remember the wisdom that can come from unexpected sources." At her signal, the courthouse officers removed the velvet covering, revealing a bronze sculpture depicting a small girl in a dress whispering into the ear of an attentive police dog. The artist had captured the exact moment of connection. Sophia, on tiptoes, hands cupped around Titan's ear, the dog's head tilted in a posture of unexpected understanding. Inscribed on the base were the words, "Even the scariest dogs are just keeping someone they love safe." Sofia Martinez, age 3. Applause erupted across the plaza. Sophia, seemingly unfazed by the attention, walked over to the real Titan and reached up to scratch behind his ear, a privilege granted to her alone. The once intimidating police dog leaned into her touch, his stern working demeanor momentarily softened by the presence of the small human, who had seen past his fierce exterior to the devoted guardian beneath. As cameras captured this newest moment between the unlikely friends, Officer Jackson watched with a pride he would once have considered unprofessional. In his 15 years of police work, nothing had affected him more profoundly than witnessing how a child's simple observation had reminded an entire community that beneath their various roles and responsibilities, they shared a common purpose: protecting those they loved. The legacy of the Whisper would continue to grow, spreading to other communities and courts, reminding adults everywhere that sometimes the most profound wisdom comes in the smallest packages.